Hello, my name is Niels Iversen and this is video number 5 in my mini-series about language learning. I'm going to speak about one of the more contentious subjects in language learning, namely how to study grammar. And there's a widespread opinion that says that you shouldn't learn grammar by reading in books, but you should just absorb it from authentic texts and things you hear. In its milder form, it says that you can have a look in a grammar book if you are in doubt about something, but you ought to be ashamed of yourself then. I disagree. Grammar, and now I'm speaking about both morphology and syntax, is a systematic description of regularities in a language. Even if you can deduce the same rules by reading and listening for thousands of hours, like children do, it would be totally stupid not to take a shortcut and get the rules for free from people who really know the language inside and out, or at least for the price of a book. Maybe the avoidance of formal grammar studies is due to the belief that grammar only can be learned through rote learning. But my vision of grammar studies is essentially I should learn it by describing the grammar myself. And I do this partly through something I call green sheets, partly through example collection, comparative studies in the literature. But let's face it, grammar is the study of irregularities in a language. Somewhere the irregularities end and you end the jungle. Then even a categorization can be useful. You'll find those in the grammars, but the tool you'll use then is not to learn tables, it is to learn through example collection. Essentially, that means that you take one topic in your grammar, you read, for instance, say about pronouns, or maybe something about a word order, and the next day or so you systematically look for examples of that in the things you read or listen to. And of course there's a simple rule. If you cannot find any examples of a rule, then the rule may not be that important. You should still learn it, but then you have to do that from the examples in your grammar book. If you want to learn the grammar of other languages than your own, then it's not a bad idea starting out learning the main names using examples from your own language. Of course you can speak that, but have you learned how to describe it? Can you identify the subject, the object in a sentence? Do you know what the different forms of verbs, substantives, adjectives and things like that are? If not, it is worth spending a couple of hours on the subject. Otherwise you will be learning both grammatical terminology and a foreign language at the same time. If you have decided to learn some grammar, you sit down and start out. For the most, you will start out with morphology, those rules that describe how single words change according to their role in a context. And this means you will have to look at the morphological tables, which is probably the most hated part of language learning at all. My first advice would be not to learn grammar from a modern textbook. The hysteria about grammar has led to an absurd reaction from the authors of such textbooks, namely to cut down all tables in bits and pieces and hiding the pieces all over the place in order not to scare potential frightened buyers. But the need to learn morphology does not disappear because you have decided to hide the tables. It is still there, and it will just become more difficult and more confusing to assemble the parts of the machine again. For that reason I would advise you to learn grammar from real grammars, not from the confused and fragmented hints in some idiotic textbook. Start out reading the grammar through from A to Z without the intention of learning it by heart, just to see what is there, what is your pensum, what do you have to learn. If possible, look through more than one grammar, and even the short treatment in a language guide can be useful as a supplement to a big grammar, or print out the relevant articles from Wikipedia or other sources on the internet. If you start out looking at the morphological tables, then see whether the sources use the same terminology. If not, try to see which forms correspond to each other in the different sources. Do yourself a favor, read about the use of different forms before you start learning the actual tables. It's much more, if at least if the names don't ring a bell. It is easier to see the point of learning something if you roughly know what it is used for. And now we are going to look at a green sheet. What you see here is the combined morphology of articles, adjectives and nouns in Icelandic. and it is written on green paper so that it doesn't disappear among all my other written pages. There is no other reason, and it could have been another color. I've yet to see a description in a grammar that combines all the information on this sheet, but I like to have an overview of a subject before I bury myself in the details. Of course, the extreme amount of information on this sheet means there isn't room for instance, exceptions. You have to learn the exceptions on a separate sheet or from a book. There is no example words, only endings, but I don't want example words in my tables anyway, so that's not a problem for me. Against all appearances, this table is namely not used for rote memorization of endings. It has three functions. First, you have to look very attentively at the tables in your books in order to be able to construct it, and you learn a lot by doing that. Second, you use it as a reference while you are reading text intensively, and then you may have to check an ending somewhere. In that case, you will always have a concrete word in your text, so you don't need one on the green sheet. And third, if you do want to have a round of rote memorization of forms, then of course you can use the example words. But don't try to learn a heap of isolated endings. That would be boring, and I suppose it would not be effective either. One thing more is those few words that don't fit into the system, they're mostly quite irregular, so the table would be a mess if you try to integrate them, but you can make tables for such words individually. For example, pronouns, or simple words like to be or something like that. Learn such words one by one and collect examples to support your memory. Now let's have a concrete look at this sheet, and I'm not going to teach you Icelandic, just to show you the principle. To the left we have got NADG, that means nominative, accusative, dative, genitive. If you don't know them already, you can just as well start learning them, because those words will pop up everywhere. Above the line you find the singular, below the line you find the plural. The next three columns show the masculine, feminine and neuter of so-called strong adjective, or rather adjective forms, because it's sad and idiotic that the grammarians have used the word strong here, because these forms, you'll find these forms with all adjectives in Icelandic. In contrast, when you speak about strong verbs, there are some verbs that are strong, others that are weak, and the same thing applies to nouns, as you will see in a moment. These so-called strong adjectives are used in isolation or in front of a noun where there is no preceding article. Now, the red things are articles. They can be in front of the noun, or they can be attached to the end of the noun. Then they are called postclitic. And you don't have that in English. But when you look at the table, the green forms just after the first red column, after a double line, shows how the adjective endings are when there is a preceding article. And after that you see several versions of how the noun itself can be inflected. In masculine, then a double line, feminine, double line, and neuter. So in this sense you can say that all combinations of article, adjective and noun are covered in this simple table here. This is another green sheet, and it shows no more than all regular endings for Latin verbs. And I like the feeling that I can look down on such a piece of paper and say, this is what I have to learn, and now I can go down into the details. The next example does not show a green sheet. It is a scanned page from one of Routledge's grammars, the one for modern Greek, and it shows a semi-regular form, namely the nouns that end in eta, iota, sigma in the plural nominative, mostly feminine nouns. And what's special about this? Well, that there are a limited number of those words, so you have to start learning them. And the book gives you a number of those words, and you will find the rest with an annotation in your dictionary. So you can just as well start learning those words, and I would suggest using a word list. You can use other methods if you want to. But so far we have been looking at morphological tables. those that are regular, where you can say they cover the whole thing. One example where you have to say this is a special case, but you have a number of words that use this special table. The thing you see on your screen right now is somewhat different. It is a list of all derivations that are connected to some way to the word for to write, pisat in Russian. And Russian is like a big machine with a lot of connections between words. Russian has got perfective and imperfective verbs. The former normally indicate things that happen, the latter indicate states or actions that repeat themselves. And these verbs have a tendency to occur in pairs formed by the addition of prefixes or in some cases infixes. And the problem is you cannot be sure which prefixes or infixes are used. In this case I've made one for the verb pisać because it has a very rich family. I would so much love to have a dictionary where you could go down and look at a certain root and see all the derivations from that root. There is a book called Roots of the Russian Language. It is so badly written that it is not worth the money. So far you have mostly been looking at morphology, and morphology is the thing that dominates very short grammars like those in language guides. But there's another part of the grammar that's called syntax, which is the use of those words you have just been inflecting. It is how to put words in order, things like that. And the way you normally study syntax is you get examples and they are subdivided and ordered according to some logical principles. Good grammars contain examples. Some contain an overwhelming number of examples. How do you remember those rules? You have to look for the logic behind them. Sometimes you can find a logic that can be put in words easily. Sometimes you can actually draw the logic. And I have a little example here. The famous Sandfeld's circles. He wanted to illustrate which unstressed French pronouns can go together, and he made this simple drawing. Mølle is possible, le levi is possible, nous la is possible, la leur is possible, but nous leur is not possible. You just look at the drawing, then you know the rule. Welcome back. As you can see, it is sometimes possible to illustrate a syntactical rule through a drawing, and then it's worth doing it. You both remember it better and you can also understand it better. But most syntactical rules are illustrated through examples. Good grammars contain examples. Some grammars contain an overwhelming number of examples. The best examples are those you find yourself, because they also tell you something about which rules are necessary to learn. If a rule is important, then you will find examples of it everywhere. If it is not that important, then you will find very few or no examples, even if you read like a madman for a day or two. Those rules can be learned later using the examples in the book. I cannot tell you much about sentence analysis and syntax here because of the time, but I will make a separate video about that. And therefore I'll say goodbye and good luck with your tables.